we talk in the book. There's another story about a company called Favi, which is a foundry in northern France. It makes its main product are gearbox forks for manual transmissions in cars, and it's the kind of old economy, machine shop job that really ought to have gone to China 2 decades ago, right? And in fact, a lot of their competitors' production has gone to China, but they maintain at least 50% market share in Europe in these products because they are so good at making them and making them efficiently, and because they haven't raised their prices even in nominal terms in almost 30 years. So anyway, when this company was first, when Jean-Francois Zobrist was first made CEO of the company, it was a very traditional, hierarchical, top-down French manufacturing company in the early 80s. And he's walking around the company, and he sees a guy, a machinist, whose name happens to be Alfred, standing in front of a supply closet, twiddling his thumbs. And he says, what are you doing here? And he says, oh, well, I'm here to replace my work gloves. Zobrist says, what? He says, oh, no, don't worry. I've got the requisition form here from my manager, and I've got my gloves, and my papers are all in order. So Zobrist says again, what? He says, well, yes, in order to get new work gloves, you have to get this form signed by your manager, and you have to bring the gloves and the form to the supply closet and wait for the supply closet manager to come and inspect the form and the gloves and open the closet and give you new ones and take the old ones and the form away. And Zobrist says, okay, thank you, carry on. And he sort of continues on through the factory, and he goes to the accounting department, and he says, what does it cost us on an hourly basis to run Alfred's machinery? And they tell him the equivalent in French francs at the time of about $100 an hour. He says, okay, well, what does a new pair of gloves cost? And they say, $7. And he says, okay, so if it takes Alfred 15 minutes to go through this process every time he needs a new pair of gloves, it's costing us $25. And yet, somewhere on our books, this glove control regime is recording, a reduction in glove procurement costs of 10% and saying, look, this is an efficiency gain. But it costs us, the equivalent of 3 pairs of gloves every time he goes through this. He could take a pair home with him to garden every time he needed a replacement. It would still be cheaper just to leave the supply closet open than to make him go through all this. To say nothing of the time that's spent by the supply closet manager, the accounting department filing the forms, the floor manager or foreman who has to fill out the forms and probably is supposed to inspect the gloves as well. All of those costs of control go uncaptured by our accounting systems, right? So part of the answer to your question, in my view, is that we measure the wrong thing. The adage, we get what we measure, is an old one in business. And we found it rife throughout companies that think that they are controlling costs in some way or avoiding waste, but are doing so at the expense of a much greater waste. One of the biggest wastes of all is all the stuff that your employees never tell you about what's wrong with your business because they've been trained not to speak up, to keep their head down, not to make waves, and not to have ideas of their own. As one guy who actually didn't make the cut in the book was told when he came up with a potentially, market transforming idea, you're here to cut wood. When you've been here long enough, you can tell us where to find it. This is the message that employees get all the time in all kinds of ways in traditional companies. And the result is that they keep their head down and they only talk about their ideas outside the office or with their friends or at the bar or with their families. And they check their brains at the door. And that is costing companies millions, if not billions of dollars that they have no means of accounting for. And so the cost is invisible, whereas, the cost of the 3%, as Gordon Forward and Isaac put it, often shows up as very concrete in the eyes of the people whose job it is to measure these things.